Orphan boy finds an old diary. What he discovers changes his life forever. The air in the old orphanage was thick with the smell of dust and damp wood. The building creaked with every gust of wind, its age worn into the faded wallpaper and uneven floors. 11-year-old Henry often sought refuge in the small attic library, where forgotten books and trinkets from another era gathered dust on sagging shelves. Henry had always been drawn to stories. They gave him a way to escape the loneliness and monotony of life at the orphanage. Most of the other children were younger, too young to understand why he preferred the quiet company of books to playing in the yard. But for Henry, the attic was a sanctuary, a place where he could lose himself in tales of adventure and wonder. One rainy afternoon, as the sound of raindrops tapped against the attic window, Henry decided to explore a corner of the library he hadn't ventured into before. The shelves there were cluttered with old ledgers, loose papers, and books with crumbling spines. As he shifted a stack of brittle documents, his hand brushed against something tucked into the shadows. It was a small, leather-bound diary, its cover cracked with age. A brass clasp held it shut, and engraved on the front were the initials EW. Intrigued, Henry sat cross-legged on the floor and carefully opened the clasp. The yellowed pages inside were covered in a spidery handwriting that seemed to dance across the paper. The first page read, "To whoever finds this, my name is Edward Whitmore, and this is the story of how I found my way home. If you are lost, as I once was, I hope my words will guide you too." Henry's heart skipped a beat. He turned the page, his curiosity ignited. Edward's story began decades ago, in a time when the orphanage had been a bustling estate owned by the Whitmore family. Edward, the youngest son of a wealthy merchant, had grown up in the very rooms where Henry now lived. But despite his privileged upbringing, Edward's childhood had been far from happy. His diary spoke of loneliness, a strict father, and a yearning for freedom. As Henry read, he felt an uncanny connection to Edward's words. The emotions on the page mirrored his own. Feelings of isolation, longing, and the hope that somewhere out there, a better life awaited. One passage stood out to Henry. "I always believed the answers to my questions lay beyond the walls of this house. But when I tried to escape, I discovered that the path forward wasn't out there. It was hidden in the very place I was trying to leave." The words lingered in Henry's mind, their meaning elusive yet profound. As Henry turned the pages, he discovered something extraordinary. Folded neatly between two entries was a hand-drawn map. The paper was fragile, its edges frayed, but the markings were clear. The map depicted the orphanage and its surrounding grounds, but there was something unusual. An X marked a spot deep within the old cellar, a place the children were forbidden to enter. Edward's diary described how he had stumbled upon a hidden compartment in the cellar, a place that had led him to a discovery that changed his life. However, the details of what he found were left tantalizingly vague. Henry's pulse quickened. The idea of exploring the cellar both thrilled and terrified him. He had heard stories from the other children about strange noises coming from below, and the matron, Mrs. Groves, had warned them never to go near it. But the map felt like an invitation, a secret meant just for him. That night, as the other children slept, Henry lay awake, the diary clutched to his chest. He couldn't stop thinking about the map and Edward's words. What had Edward found in the cellar? Could it hold answers for Henry too? After what felt like hours, Henry made up his mind. He would wait until the dead of night, when the orphanage was silent, and he would follow the map. Whatever lay hidden in the cellar, he had to find out. As the rain continued to fall outside, Henry drifted into a restless sleep, his dreams filled with images of winding tunnels and hidden treasures. Henry's decision to follow the map weighed heavily on him as the hours passed. The rain outside had stopped, leaving only the eerie creaks of the old building to keep him company. The other children were fast asleep, their breaths rising and falling in the quiet dormitory. Clutching the diary in one hand and a small flashlight in the other, Henry tiptoed across the room, careful not to wake anyone. His heart pounded as he reached the door, pausing briefly to listen for any signs of Mrs. Groves or the night watchman. The orphanage seemed like an entirely different place at night. Shadows stretched long and dark across the walls, and every sound felt amplified in the stillness. Henry made his way down the creaky staircase, his small frame nearly trembling with a mix of fear and excitement. He reached the first floor and turned toward the hallway that led to the cellar. The door to the cellar was heavy and worn, with rusted hinges that squealed loudly as he pulled it open. He froze, holding his breath, but after a moment, the silence resumed. The cellar stairs were steep and narrow, descending into a darkness so thick that Henry's flashlight seemed to barely cut through it. Each step groaned beneath his weight, sending echoes that made his pulse race. The air grew colder as he descended, and the faint smell of earth and mildew filled his nose. At the bottom of the stairs, he found himself in a low-ceilinged space with stone walls and rows of shelves filled with forgotten items. Broken furniture, old tools, and crates piled with dusty linens surrounded him. Henry pulled out the map and scanned the room, using the flashlight to match the layout. The map led him to a far corner, where a large wooden cabinet stood against the wall. The cabinet was old and imposing, with intricate carvings that hinted at its former grandeur. He reached out and tugged at the doors, but they wouldn't budge. Examining the edges, he noticed a faint outline of a hidden panel on the side. He pressed against it, and with a faint click, the panel popped open, revealing a small compartment inside. Inside the compartment was a leather pouch, tied tightly with a string. Henry's hands shook as he untied the knot and emptied the contents onto the floor. Out spilled a bundle of folded papers and a small, tarnished locket. He picked up the locket first, turning it over in his hands. It felt warm, almost alive, despite the chill of the cellar. When he opened it, he found a tiny portrait inside, a boy about his age, with a serious expression and piercing eyes. Could this be Edward? He set the locket down and unfolded the papers, carefully smoothing them out under the flashlight's beam. The first page was a letter, written in the same spidery handwriting as the diary. It was addressed to the one who follows. Henry read the letter aloud in a whisper, his voice unsteady. If you've found this, then you've already taken the first step. I left these things behind not for myself, but for someone like me, someone searching for where they belong. The answers you seek aren't in this locket or these words. They're inside you. But sometimes, we need a push to see the path clearly. Take the locket. It belongs to a Whitmore. And if you're holding it, so do you? Henry stared at the letter, his mind spinning. Was it possible? Could he be connected to Edward? His heart swelled with questions. He picked up the locket again, clutching it tightly in his palm. The warmth of it seemed to spread through him, a comforting reassurance that he wasn't as alone as he had always felt. But the letter wasn't finished. There was more. The locket is a key. Take it to the study upstairs, the room with the locked door. The answers you need are waiting there. The study. It was one of the most mysterious rooms in the orphanage, locked for as long as Henry could remember. None of the children had ever been inside, and Mrs. Groves had always been vague about why it was off-limits. Henry's fear began to creep back. Venturing to the cellar had been one thing, but breaking into the study was a risk that could get him into serious trouble. Yet the letter's words burned in his mind. The answers you need are waiting there. He gathered the locket and the letter, tucking them back into the leather pouch. As he crept back up the cellar stairs, his resolve hardened. If this was his chance to uncover the truth about himself, he couldn't let it slip away. The orphanage was still silent when Henry reached the second floor. The door to the study loomed ahead of him, its dark wood and brass handle gleaming faintly in the moonlight streaming through the hallway windows. He pulled the locket from his pocket, running his fingers over its surface. A small groove at the back caught his attention, one he hadn't noticed before. He pressed against it, and with a soft click, a key slid out from a hidden compartment. Henry stared at the key in awe, hardly able to believe what he was holding. Taking a deep breath, he inserted it into the study's lock. The mechanism turned smoothly, and the door creaked open. The room inside was unlike anything Henry had ever seen. Shelves lined with books stretched from floor to ceiling, their spines glinting with gold lettering. A massive desk sat in the center, papers and trinkets scattered across its surface as if someone had left in a hurry. And on the far wall, illuminated by the pale light of the moon, was a large painting. It was a portrait of a family, parents, 2 older children, and a young boy. The boy was unmistakable. He was the same boy from the locket. Henry stepped closer, his breath catching in his throat. Beneath the painting, a brass plaque read, "The Whitmore Family, 1873. Henry's knees felt weak as he sank into the chair by the desk. The locket, the diary, the letter, it all began to make sense. Edward hadn't just been writing to anyone. He had been writing to him. Henry sat frozen in the chair, his mind racing. The painting stared down at him as if it held secrets waiting to be uncovered. The boy in the locket and the painting, Edward Whitmore, was clearly connected to him in ways he couldn't yet understand. The letter's words echoed in his mind. The answers you need are waiting there. But where? What answers? He shifted his attention to the desk. Its surface was cluttered with papers, quills, and a tarnished inkwell. Among the scattered items was a sealed envelope, its edges brittle with age. His fingers trembled as he picked it up, breaking the seal carefully. Inside was another letter, this one written in the same familiar handwriting. "To my dearest family, should you ever find this," it began. "I leave this house knowing that it holds everything you will ever need. Within these walls lies not just our history, but the truth of who we are. To my youngest, Edward, I trust you will know what to do when the time comes. This home is more than a shelter, it is a legacy. Protect it and it will protect you." Henry read the letter again, slower this time. Was this written by Edward's father? The phrase, "This home is more than a shelter, it is a legacy," sent a chill through him. The study, the locket, the painting, it all pointed to something greater, something hidden within the orphanage that went beyond Edward's personal story. Henry glanced around the room again, his eyes scanning every corner. Behind the desk was a bookshelf, its rows of leather-bound volumes perfectly aligned. One book stood out, a deep red cover with no title. He felt a tug of curiosity as he walked over and slid the book from its place. It was heavier than he expected, and when he opened it, he found not pages, but a hollowed-out compartment inside. Nestled within was a small iron key, tied to a tag that read West Wing Vault. Henry's heart skipped. The west wing of the orphanage had been sealed off for decades, its doors padlocked and its windows boarded. Mrs. Groves had always dismissed questions about it, saying it was unsafe and off-limits, but the tag on the key left no doubt. Whatever Edward had discovered was hidden in the west wing. The air seemed to thicken as Henry turned the key over in his hand. He knew what he had to do, but the thought of venturing into the abandoned part of the orphanage filled him with dread. What if he got caught? What if he found something he wasn't ready to face? Yet, the pull of the mystery was stronger than his fear. As quietly as he could, Henry slipped out of the study and made his way toward the west wing. The long hallway leading there was dark, the moonlight failing to reach this part of the building. The old wooden floor creaked under his feet, each step echoing like a warning. He reached the door at the end of the hall, its surface covered in years of dust and cobwebs. The padlock was rusted, but still intact. Henry took a deep breath and inserted the key. The lock resisted at first, but with a twist and a groan, it clicked open. He pushed the door, and it creaked on its hinges, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. The air was colder here, carrying the faint scent of earth and something metallic. Henry switched on his flashlight, the beam slicing through the blackness as he descended. The stairs seemed to go on forever, each step feeling heavier than the last. At the bottom, he found himself in a large stone chamber. The walls were lined with shelves, and in the center of the room was a massive iron vault, its door adorned with intricate carvings. The carvings depicted scenes of people working together, building, planting, celebrating. At the center was an engraving of a tree, its branches reaching outward and its roots stretching deep into the earth. Beneath the tree was a single word, unity. Henry stepped closer, running his fingers over the cold metal. The vault had a keyhole, and the iron key from the study fit perfectly. With a deep breath, he turned the key, and the door creaked open. Inside, Henry found a chest, its wood dark and polished. He knelt and opened it, revealing its contents, stacks of papers, journals, and small boxes filled with coins and jewelry. But what caught his attention was a document at the very top, sealed with wax. He broke the seal and unfolded it. It was a deed, titled Whitmore Estate Trust, and it detailed the true ownership of the orphanage. The property, according to the document, was meant to be a sanctuary for those in need, a safe haven for orphans and the downtrodden. Edward Whitmore had left everything to the children who lived there, ensuring they would always have a home. The estate had been entrusted to caretakers who were supposed to honor this legacy, but somewhere along the way, that promise had been forgotten. Henry's eyes widened as he realized the significance of what he was holding. This wasn't just a building. It was meant to be a beacon of hope, a place where children like him could feel safe and supported. But the current state of the orphanage, with its neglect and strict rules, was a far cry from Edward's vision. He dug deeper into the chest, finding more letters and journals written by Edward. One entry stood out. If ever this place loses its purpose, it will take someone with courage to restore it. If you found this, you are that someone. Henry's hands trembled. Could he be the one to bring Edward's vision back to life? It felt overwhelming, but he also felt a surge of determination. For the first time, he didn't feel like an invisible boy trapped in an uncaring world. He felt like someone who could make a difference. Clutching the documents, Henry made his way back up the stairs, his mind racing with plans. He didn't know exactly how he would do it, but he knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't let Edward's legacy be forgotten. Henry climbed the stairs with a sense of purpose he had never felt before. The dusty documents and the truth they held were heavier than their weight in his hands. By the time he reached the top, the dim hallway of the orphanage seemed different. It wasn't just a place of shadows and forgotten corners anymore. It was a place filled with potential, waiting to be brought back to life. The challenge ahead was daunting. Mrs. Groves was strict, set in her ways, and unlikely to believe a boy's claims about the orphanage's true purpose. The other staff, though kinder, didn't wield any real authority. And the other children? Henry wasn't sure if they'd even understand what he had found. Back in the dormitory, Henry stashed the documents under his mattress, carefully concealing them from view. He lay awake, his mind racing with ideas. He thought of Edward's words, of the sacrifices the Whitmore family must have made to preserve this place for children like him. He couldn't let their efforts go to waste. But how could he make anyone listen to him? By morning, Henry had resolved to act, even if he wasn't sure how. He started with small steps, speaking quietly to a few of the older children he trusted. At first, they were skeptical, their faces a mix of disbelief and curiosity. "A secret vault?" one boy whispered. "That sounds made up." "I saw it," Henry said firmly. "And I found these." He showed them a few of Edward's letters and the deed, careful not to reveal everything at once. The orphanage was meant to be different. A place for us, not just a building where we're forgotten. One of the girls, a tall, thoughtful girl named Sarah, studied the documents. "If this is real, we can't keep it to ourselves. Someone has to know." Henry nodded. "But who? Mrs. Groves? She'll just lock this up and pretend it never existed." "We could show it to Mr. Turner," Sarah suggested. "He's kinder than the others. Maybe he'll help." Mr. Turner was the orphanage's handyman, a quiet man with a gentle demeanor who often slipped the children extra bread rolls or turned a blind eye when they broke curfew. Henry wasn't sure if he had the authority to do anything, but he agreed it was worth a try. That evening, after dinner, Henry and Sarah approached Mr. Turner in the workshop. He looked up from his tools, wiping his hands on a rag. "What's this about?" he asked, glancing between them. Henry hesitated before pulling out the deed and one of Edward's letters. "We found this," he said. "It's about the orphanage, what it was supposed to be." Mr. Turner furrowed his brow as he read the documents. His hands, rough and calloused, trembled slightly as he turned the pages. When he finished, he looked up, his expression a mix of surprise and something else, something like hope. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice low. "In the West Wing," Henry admitted. "There's a vault down there. Edward Whitmore left all of this behind." Mr. Turner leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I've worked here for 15 years, and I always wondered about the history of this place. The way things are run now, it doesn't feel right. But this changes everything. Will you help us?" Sarah asked. Mr. Turner nodded. "I don't know how much power I have, but I'll do what I can. First, we'll need to make copies of these documents. If we only have one set, it's too risky." Over the next few days, Henry, Sarah, and Mr. Turner worked in secret. They copied the most important letters and the deed, hiding the originals in a safe place. Henry couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, and every creak of the floorboards sent his heart racing. Still, they pressed on. Their next step was to find someone outside the orphanage who could help. Mr. Turner suggested contacting a local historian who specialized in estate records and had a reputation for advocating for preservation efforts. Her name was Mrs. Ellison, and she had ties to the town council. On a cold, gray morning, Mr. Turner took the copies and left the orphanage, telling Mrs. Groves he was running errands. Henry and Sarah waited anxiously all day, every noise making them jump. When Mr. Turner returned that evening, his expression was serious but hopeful. "She believes us," he said. "She's coming tomorrow to see everything for herself." The next day, Mrs. Ellison arrived under the pretense of inspecting the building for repairs. She was an older woman with sharp eyes and an air of authority that even Mrs. Groves couldn't ignore. Henry watched from the hallway as she spoke to Mr. Turner, her gaze sweeping over the orphanage's worn walls and faded grandeur. When Mrs. Ellison saw the documents and listened to Henry's account, her expression softened. "You've done something extraordinary," she told him. "Edward Whitmore's vision was remarkable, and it's clear you have the same spirit. Don't worry, we'll make sure this place becomes what it was meant to be." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Mrs. Ellison worked tirelessly to bring the truth to light, presenting the documents to the town council and rallying support from the community. Journalists wrote articles about the orphanage's hidden history, and donations poured in to restore the building and fund programs for the children. For the first time in years, the orphanage buzzed with excitement and possibility. Rooms were renovated, new books filled the library, and a sense of warmth replaced the cold indifference that had once defined the place. Through it all, Henry remained at the center, his quiet determination inspiring everyone around him. He often thought about Edward's words, the diary that had set everything in motion, and the locket he still carried with him. He felt a deep connection to the boy who had lived in these halls so long ago, as if they were part of the same story. On the day the renovations were completed, a plaque was unveiled in the front hall. It read, "In honor of Edward Whitmore and the children who carry his legacy forward. This is your home." Henry stood in front of the plaque, surrounded by his friends and the staff who had helped make it all happen. For the first time in his life, he felt a sense of belonging, a knowledge that he wasn't just an invisible orphan. He was part of something bigger, something lasting. As the others celebrated around him, Henry slipped away to the study. He opened the diary one last time, running his fingers over the faded pages. "We did it," he whispered. "We found our way home." And in that quiet moment, Henry knew his life, and the lives of countless others, had been changed forever. Months passed, and the orphanage flourished in ways Henry could have only dreamed of. The once dim, forgotten halls were now filled with light, laughter, and a renewed sense of purpose. The renovations brought warmth back to the old building, both in its appearance and its spirit. What had once been a place of neglect had transformed into a sanctuary, a true reflection of Edward Whitmore's vision. Henry was no longer just a boy in the background. The staff often turned to him for ideas and input, and his peers looked up to him as a quiet but determined leader. The community rallied around the orphanage, offering their time and resources to ensure its success. Classes were added, teaching skills that would prepare the children for life beyond the orphanage, and clubs encouraged them to explore their passions. For the first time in years, Henry felt like he belonged, like he was part of something that mattered. One day, as Henry sat in the library, his favorite room in the newly renovated orphanage, Mrs. Ellison arrived with an envelope in hand. She smiled warmly as she handed it to him. "This came for you," she said. "I think you'll find it interesting." Henry opened the envelope, revealing a letter written on thick, cream-colored paper. The handwriting was elegant, almost formal. As he began to read, his heart skipped a beat. "Dear Henry, word of your discovery has reached me, and I felt compelled to write to you. My name is Charles Whitmore. I am Edward Whitmore's great-grandnephew, and though I live far from where my family's estate once stood, I have always held a deep respect for our history. The work you've done to preserve Edward's vision and restore the orphanage is nothing short of remarkable. My family owes you a debt of gratitude. Henry blinked, rereading the letter to make sure he had understood it correctly. A living descendant of Edward Whitmore? He hadn't even considered the possibility. The letter continued. As Edward's descendant, I feel a responsibility to ensure that the legacy you've uncovered continues to thrive. I would like to visit the orphanage and meet the young man who made all of this possible. Please let me know when it would be convenient. With admiration, Charles Whitmore. Henry sat back in his chair, the letter resting in his lap. The idea of meeting a member of Edward's family was both exciting and intimidating. What would Charles think of the orphanage? Would he approve of the changes they had made? When Mrs. Ellison saw Henry's expression, she placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. This is a good thing, Henry. Charles seems sincere, and he might be able to help us even more. Henry nodded, though his nerves still lingered. Do you think he'll like what we've done here? I think he'll be proud, she said. 2 weeks later, Charles Whitmore arrived. He was a tall man in his 50s, with sharp features and kind eyes. He stepped into the orphanage's front hall and paused, taking in the sight of the restored building. Henry stood nearby, clutching the diary and feeling smaller than usual. Charles turned to him, his expression softening. You must be Henry, he said, extending a hand. Henry shook it, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, sir, Charles smiled. There's no need to call me sir. If anything, I should be calling you that. You've done something extraordinary here. As they walked through the orphanage, Henry showed Charles the changes they had made, the refurbished dormitories, the bright classrooms, and the bustling library. Charles listened intently, occasionally asking questions but mostly letting Henry lead the way. When they reached the study, Henry hesitated. This is where I found the diary, he said, holding it out to Charles. It started everything. Charles took the diary, his hands gentle as if he were holding a precious artifact. He flipped through the pages, his expression growing more emotional with each one. This was Edward's handwriting, he said quietly. I've seen samples of it in our family records, but I never thought I'd hold something so personal. Henry watched as Charles carefully returned the diary to him. You should keep it, Charles said. It belongs to you now, as much as it ever belonged to him. Henry's chest swelled with gratitude. Thank you, he said. Before leaving, Charles made an announcement to the staff and children gathered in the front hall. My great-granduncle Edward believed in the power of this place to change lives, and what I've seen here today proves that his vision is alive and well. I want to do my part to ensure that this legacy continues. I will provide funding for scholarships, so every child who leaves this orphanage has the opportunity to follow their dreams. The room erupted in cheers, and Henry felt a surge of pride. He had set something in motion that was bigger than himself, and it was still growing. In the weeks that followed, life at the orphanage continued to flourish. Henry often found himself reflecting on how much had changed since the day he found Edward's diary. What had started as a curious discovery had turned into a journey of self-discovery, purpose, and connection. One evening, as the sun set and the library filled with the golden glow of twilight, Henry sat at the desk in the study. He opened the diary and added his own entry at the back, in the empty pages Edward had left behind. My name is Henry. I am an orphan, but I have found my family here. This place is my home, and I will protect it, just as Edward did. To whoever reads this in the future, know that you are never alone. This is your home too. Henry closed the diary, a sense of peace washing over him. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he had found his place in the world, a place where he could make a difference, just as Edward had before him. And for the first time, Henry didn't feel like an orphan anymore. He felt like a Whitmore. Henry's days at the orphanage became filled with new purpose. He wasn't just a boy with a story, he was now part of a legacy, a bridge between Edward Whitmore's vision and the future it was building for the children who would come after him. The Whitmore orphanage had become more than just a home, it was now a beacon of hope and possibility for the entire community. The scholarship program Charles Whitmore had promised came to life quickly. For the first time, the older children of the orphanage were given the opportunity to attend colleges, trade schools, and apprenticeships supported by the Whitmore family's funding. As each success story unfolded, the spirit of the orphanage grew stronger. Henry watched with pride as his peers began to imagine lives beyond the walls of the home. But for Henry, there was still a lingering sense of curiosity, a need to know more about Edward and the Whitmore family. The diary had answered many questions, but it had also left others hanging. Who was Edward truly? What challenges had he faced that led him to create this sanctuary? And was there more to the story of the Whitmore legacy that remained hidden? One afternoon, as he sorted through the library's collection of books, Henry came across a box labeled Estate Records. It was filled with yellowed documents, ledgers, and letters dating back over a century. As he sifted through them, he found a series of journals written by Edward's father, Benjamin Whitmore. These journals, while formal and businesslike, gave Henry a glimpse into the man who had built the estate, and the tensions that had existed between him and his youngest son. In one entry, Benjamin wrote, "Edward refuses to follow the path I have laid out for him. He is stubborn, always dreaming of ways to give away what we have built. He speaks of charity, of helping those who cannot help themselves. I cannot understand it, but I fear he will squander our legacy in his pursuit of ideals." Henry frowned as he read the words. It was clear Edward had faced opposition within his own family. The decision to transform the estate into a home for orphans must have come at great personal cost. Yet, Edward had done it anyway, driven by a conviction that the Whitmore legacy should be about more than wealth. Henry continued reading, piecing together the family's story. He discovered that Edward had been deeply influenced by his mother, Eleanor Whitmore, whose own writings painted a picture of a compassionate woman dedicated to helping others. In one letter, she wrote to Edward, "My dearest Edward, the world will often tell you to guard what you have, to protect your wealth and privilege. But true richness lies in the hearts you touch and the lives you change. Do not let the weight of our name keep you from following your heart. This estate was built with hard work, but it is meant to be shared." Henry felt a swell of admiration for Eleanor. It was clear she had planted the seeds of kindness and generosity that Edward would later nurture into his life's work. Inspired by these discoveries, Henry decided to create a project that would honor the Whitmore family's legacy in full. He shared his idea with Sarah and Mr. Turner, who immediately agreed to help. Together, they began gathering stories from the children, staff, and community members whose lives had been touched by the orphanage. They compiled photographs, letters, and testimonies into a book titled The Whitmore Legacy, A Home for All. The book became a symbol of everything the orphanage stood for, and it was shared with donors, alumni, and even the local government. Its pages told the story not just of Edward Whitmore, but of the generations of children who had found hope within the estate's walls. It celebrated the resilience of the orphanage's residents and the enduring power of kindness. When the book was complete, Charles Whitmore returned to the orphanage for a special ceremony. Standing before the children and staff, he held the book high and addressed the crowd. "This book is not just a history, it is a testament to what we can achieve when we believe in each other. Edward's vision lives on because of people like Henry, Sarah, Mr. Turner, and all of you who call this place home. The Whitmore name belongs to all of us now." The ceremony was emotional, with tears and applause filling the room. Henry felt a deep sense of pride and belonging as he looked around at the faces of his friends and family. For the first time, he understood that the legacy he had uncovered wasn't just about the past, it was about the future they were building together. As the years went by, the Whitmore orphanage continued to thrive. Children who had once felt invisible grew into confident, capable adults, supported by the love and opportunities the orphanage provided. Henry remained a guiding presence, even as he grew older and pursued his own dreams. Eventually, Henry became the director of the orphanage, a role that felt like a natural continuation of the path Edward had started. Under his leadership, the Whitmore orphanage expanded its reach, opening satellite homes in other towns and creating a network of support for vulnerable children across the region. On the 100th anniversary of Edward Whitmore's passing, a new plaque was unveiled in the orphanage's garden. In memory of Edward Whitmore and Eleanor Whitmore, whose vision and compassion created a legacy that continues to inspire. This home is a testament to the power of love, kindness, and the belief that everyone deserves a place to belong. Henry stood before the plaque, now a man in his 30s, with children laughing and playing around him. He held the diary in his hands, its leather cover worn from years of careful reading. As he looked at the plaque, he felt a profound sense of gratitude for Edward, for Eleanor, and for the chance to carry their legacy forward. And in that moment, Henry knew the truth. The Whitmore Orphanage was no longer just a building. It was a promise, a living testament to the idea that even the smallest acts of kindness could change the world. And it would continue to do so for generations to come. As the Whitmore Orphanage moved into its next chapter, its story grew far beyond the confines of the estate. The legacy of Edward and Eleanor Whitmore became a source of inspiration not only for the children who lived there but for the entire community. Local schools, businesses, and organizations began partnering with the orphanage, offering mentorship programs, internships, and resources to help the children transition into adulthood with confidence and hope. Henry, now firmly at the helm as director, found himself constantly amazed at how the ripple effect of one man's vision continued to evolve. But with the growth came new challenges. The orphanage's success meant more children sought refuge there, and while the Whitmore Trust provided significant funding, the expanding programs required even more resources. Henry decided it was time to take a bold step. Inspired by the Whitmore family's history, he organized an annual fundraiser called the Whitmore Legacy Gala. Held in the grand dining hall of the orphanage, the gala would be an event that celebrated the past while securing the future. The night of the first gala, the dining hall was transformed. Strings of lights illuminated the room, and the tables were adorned with centerpieces crafted by the children. Guests from all walks of life attended: business leaders, former residents, community members, and even a few descendants of the Whitmore family. Henry, dressed in a sharp suit, felt a mixture of nerves and excitement as he prepared to address the crowd. As he stepped onto the small stage at the front of the room, the chatter quieted. He held Edward's diary in one hand and paused for a moment, looking out at the sea of faces. "Welcome, everyone," he began. "Thank you for being here tonight to celebrate something extraordinary, not just the history of the Whitmore Orphanage, but the incredible future we are building together. What started with one man's dream, hidden in these walls for decades, has grown into something none of us could have imagined." He opened the diary and read a passage that had always resonated with him. "If ever this place loses its purpose, it will take someone with courage to restore it. If you found this, you are that someone." When I first read these words, Henry continued, I was just a boy searching for answers, unsure of my place in the world. But Edward's words gave me courage. They reminded me that even the smallest among us can make a difference. And tonight, I see so many of you who have become part of this story, who have joined us in ensuring that the Whitmore legacy continues to shine. The applause was thunderous. As the evening progressed, guests mingled, toured the orphanage, and listened to performances by the children. By the end of the night, the gala had exceeded its fundraising goal, ensuring the orphanage's programs could continue to expand. But the gala was more than just a financial success. It became a tradition, an annual event that drew people from near and far to celebrate the power of kindness, resilience, and community. Each year, new stories emerged from the orphanage, stories of children overcoming obstacles and finding their place in the world, carrying the Whitmore name with pride. As time passed, Henry began to think about the next generation of leaders who would carry on the work he and so many others had poured their hearts into. One day, as he walked through the garden, he spotted a young boy sitting on a bench, clutching a notebook. The boy, James, was one of the newer arrivals, a quiet child with a sharp mind and a love for books. Henry sat beside him, noticing the boy's intense focus as he scribbled on the pages. "What are you working on?" he asked. James hesitated before turning the notebook toward Henry. Inside were drawings of the orphanage, detailed sketches of its rooms, hallways, and grounds, along with notes about ways it could be improved. "These are incredible," Henry said, genuinely impressed. "You've got quite the eye for design." James blushed but smiled shyly. I thought maybe some things could be better. Like, if we had a bigger library or more space in the art room." Henry's heart swelled with pride. "You know, James, when I was your age, I found something in this orphanage that changed my life. And now, I think you might be the one to change it even more." James looked up at him, his eyes wide. "Me?" "Yes, you," Henry said with a grin. "You have ideas and you care about this place. That's exactly what it needs." From that day on, Henry began mentoring James, just as he had been guided by those who had come before him. He taught James about the history of the orphanage, shared Edward's diary with him, and encouraged him to dream big. Over time, James blossomed into a confident young leader, full of ideas for how to make the orphanage an even better place. Years later, when Henry decided to step down as director, there was no doubt in his mind who should take his place. At the announcement ceremony, he handed James the diary, its pages now filled not only with Edward's words but with the entries of those who had carried on his legacy. "This belongs to you now," Henry said. "It's more than a diary, it's a reminder of where we've been and where we're going. Take care of it and take care of this home." James accepted the diary with reverence, his voice steady as he said, "I'll do my best, Henry. Thank you for believing in me." As Henry watched James take the helm, he felt a profound sense of peace. The Whitmore orphanage was in good hands, its future secure. The ripple Edward had started so long ago continued to grow, touching lives in ways no one could have predicted. And as Henry walked through the halls one last time, he smiled, knowing that the story of the Whitmore orphanage was far from over. It was a living legacy, carried forward by every child who had ever called it home and every person who had dared to believe in its promise. The Whitmore orphanage wasn't just a place. It was a testament to the power of hope, kindness, and the courage to dream, and it would remain so for generations to come. Henry stepped out into the garden as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the Whitmore orphanage. The sound of laughter echoed in the distance, children playing a game of tag in the courtyard. He leaned against one of the garden's ancient trees, the same one Edward Whitmore had planted as a boy, and felt a sense of completion. His time as director had been everything he had hoped for and more, but it was time to pass the torch. James had taken to his new role with vigor, approaching each challenge with the same determination and creativity Henry had seen in him as a boy. Under James's leadership, new programs were launched, an arts initiative, a technology lab, and a mentorship network that connected former residents with current ones. The orphanage had grown into more than just a refuge for children. It was now a hub of innovation and opportunity. Henry often returned to visit, watching from the sidelines as the next generation carried on the Whitmore legacy. During one such visit, James greeted him warmly, a mix of pride and gratitude in his eyes. "I'm glad you're here," James said, leading Henry into the library. "There's something I want to show you." On the library's central table sat a book, a second volume of the Whitmore legacy, compiled by James and the children. It was filled with new stories, photographs, and entries from the diary, carefully preserved and expanded upon. Henry flipped through the pages, his heart swelling as he read about children who had overcome adversity, gone on to college, or started families of their own. Every story was a testament to the impact of the orphanage and the values that had been passed down from Edward Whitmore himself. "This is incredible," Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've done more than I ever could have imagined." James smiled. "I learned from the best. And I wanted you to know, we're dedicating this volume to you." Henry's breath caught as he read the inscription on the first page, "To Henry, who reminded us that even the smallest ripple can create waves of change. Your courage and kindness have shaped us all." For the first time in years, Henry felt tears sting his eyes. He blinked them away, laughing softly. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," James said. "You've already said it through everything you've done." As the years went on, Henry's visits to the orphanage became less frequent. He found peace in a quieter life, tending to his garden and writing letters to former residents who still sought his advice. Yet, the diary remained with him, its worn leather cover a reminder of the journey that had defined his life. One crisp autumn day, a letter arrived at his door. It was from Sarah, one of his oldest friends from the orphanage. She had gone on to become a teacher and now ran an education program for underprivileged children in another city. Her letter was full of updates about her work and the lives she had touched, but one sentence stood out to Henry. "The Whitmore legacy is everywhere now, Henry. You started something bigger than all of us." Henry set the letter down, his heart full. He realized then that the legacy of the Whitmore Orphanage had grown beyond its walls. It had become a movement, carried forward by every life it had touched. The ripple Edward had started so long ago had turned into a wave, spreading hope and change far beyond what anyone could have imagined. As Henry grew older, he often found himself returning to the garden where it had all begun. The tree Edward had planted stood tall and strong, its roots deep and its branches reaching toward the sky. Beneath its shade, a bench had been placed, a simple wooden bench with an inscription carved into the backrest. What matters isn't how you look, it's how you show up. One day, as Henry sat on the bench, a group of children approached him. They were visiting the orphanage with their families, part of a program that brought former residents back to share their stories. One of the children, a curious boy with bright eyes, climbed onto the bench beside him. "Are you Henry?" the boy asked. Henry smiled. "I am. My mom said you found a diary here," the boy continued. "And that it changed everything?" "It did," Henry said, nodding. "It helped me see that we all have the power to make a difference. Even when we feel small, our actions can create ripples that grow bigger than we ever imagined." The boy thought about this for a moment before asking, "Do you still have the diary?" Henry chuckled. "I do. But the most important part isn't what's written in it. It's what we do with what we've learned from it." The boy smiled, as if he understood more than his years should allow. "I want to make ripples too." "You already are," Henry said, ruffling the boy's hair. "Just by being here." As the boy ran off to join his friends, Henry leaned back on the bench, his gaze lifting to the tree above. The leaves rustled softly in the breeze, their sound like a whisper of gratitude. He thought of Edward, of Eleanor, of the countless children who had walked these halls and found a home within its walls. And as the sun set over the Whitmore Orphanage, casting its golden light across the garden, Henry felt a deep sense of peace. The legacy he had uncovered, nurtured, and passed on would continue to grow, carried forward by those who believed in its power. The Whitmore Orphanage was more than a place. It was a promise, a testament to the idea that no act of kindness is ever too small, and that every life, no matter how unassuming, has the potential to change the world. And as long as there were people willing to believe in that promise, the ripple would never end.